Hello and welcome. You're watching Bloomberg Quinn. Now, there's the classic conundrum if you own an iPhone. And if you own an iPhone 6, 6S or a 7, well then this is something that seems to bother you a lot. This red thing coming up here actually prompting you to update your iPhone OS, right? The current one on the iPhone 7 happens to be 11.2.1. That's what they're asking me to do. But I'm a little worried. And why so? I'll tell you that. Because there's been this myth that's been doing the rounds for the longest time about older iPhones getting slower with time. A lot of people always said, well, it was because the company wanted you to buy a new iPhone and upgrade your iPhone. It has something to do with performance and batteries being linked. But what if I told you now that there is proof that these, the performance levels on these phones is actually being throttled. Processor speeds are being throttled. And it's not me saying this. There's actually someone who's done a lot of research on this and conducted a set of tests on it. He's actually joining us from Ontario in Canada. John Poole, founder of Primate Labs, joins us on the show today. John, thanks so much for speaking with us on Bloomberg Quint.
My pleasure.
John, I didn't want to, really reveal everything in that introduction. I wanted you to explain to me and the viewers how on earth are the speeds on these iPhones 6, 6Ss and 7s being reduced? And is this being done by Apple, and why would Apple do so?
So what our understanding is of the matter right now is that if you have an older iPhone with a battery that its health is degraded past a certain point, then what Apple is doing is they are limiting the performance of the processor in your phone. The summary is that the battery is no longer able to provide enough charge to the processor for it to operate at maximum speed. Whenever this, if the processor were to be unlimited, so to speak, and be able to reach these high frequencies that you expect with a brand new phone, then the phone would simply just shut down, and you wouldn't be able to start it again until you plugged it into charge again. So what Apple did, and based on our data, we believe this is around 10.2.1, the iOS update that came out, I believe, in January, was they added a limit. So they'd look at your battery, they'd look at sort of the age and various characteristics of it, and try and make a determination of whether it was still capable to deliver the charge that the processor needed. And if it wasn't, they'd add sort of an arbitrary threshold. Now, when we looked through the data that we've got available, we found there were a few different thresholds. So it might be if you have a slightly older phone, it may not be as bad, but if you have a really old phone, then it could be quite severe.
It becomes interesting what your findings are. And before we actually get in deeper into, all your research, I want to just bring up what Apple actually told us when we got in touch with them about this as well. And this is exactly what Apple had to say. They said, our goal is to deliver the best experience for customers, which includes overall performance and prolonging the life of their devices. Lithium-ion batteries become less capable of supplying peak current demands when in cold conditions, have a low battery charge, or as they age over time, which can result in the device unexpectedly shutting down to protect its electronic components. Last year, we released a feature for the iPhone 6, the iPhone 6S, and the iPhone SE to smooth out the instantaneous peaks only when needed to prevent the device from unexpectedly shutting down during these conditions. We've now extended that feature to the iPhone 7 with iOS 11.2 and plan to add support for other products in the future. So, John, what I want to understand from you is this claim that lithium-ion batteries diminish over time. That's something that even your research has corroborated. But wouldn't that make a lot of customers wary of really updating their phones? Because even now, when I'm prompted to actually update my OS, I'd imagine that it's better to stick to an older one, perhaps before 11.2. And in fact, I want to pull up a couple of your findings where. And if you could explain them to us as well, which essentially talk about how the iPhone 7 performed with the 11.2 update when it came to your Geekbench scores, and then how the iPhone 6s performed with a previous rendition, I think 10.2.
Right. So what we noticed when we went through our database of results was that for both the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 6s, with different software updates, what happened was prior to the update, if you looked at the distribution of scores, what you'd see is approximately what you'd expect. A one peak on the distribution centered around the average performance for that device. Once this new software update was released, what happened was you still had that rather large peak at the at the high end of the distribution, but then several smaller peaks lower down the distribution, lower performance, also emerged. And what we've noticed is as you've gone from subsequent releases, as the phones continue to age, those smaller peaks get larger, which suggests that initially a phone might be affected by this update. But then as the battery continues to age, the update will kick in and simply sort of starts, as Apple put it, smoothing out the demand from the processor so that the battery can cope.
John, it becomes interesting because, well, there's a massive fan base for Apple's products, iPhones all over the world. There was a lot of, interest for this, Decima edition or the iPhone 10 really. But what I want to understand from you is why would a company like Apple do something like this? Now, I know if you actually go up to an Apple store, it costs around $80 to replace your battery. There's a lot of third parties that are actually coming up with batteries for $10, $20, which obviously void the warranty on your product, so no one advises you to use those particular methods. But why would they do this? Isn't there another way, technically speaking, to perhaps optimize performance based on battery usage?
And that's sort of one of the open questions right now that I know a number of people are trying to figure out. Is this a issue that Apple could have solved another way, or is this a limitation of the design of the iPhone? But right now, the problems that Apple was facing was that their phones were suddenly shutting down. We had customers, complaining about a phone with 30-35% charge simply shutting down and then being unusable until they could get home and start charging it again. That's not ideal, especially if you're out and about, as most of us are now with your smartphone in your pocket. You rely on that to communicate, you rely on that to find your way. Apple's fix, from a technical standpoint, I understand the sort of trade-off they decided to make. The battery wasn't able to provide the charge, the current that the processor needed, so their only option really was to limit the processor and reduce the demand on the battery.
Right, John, let's just break down some of your research as well. And just for everyone tuned in, if we're sounding like two tech geeks, well, we could first explain to them what a Geekbench score is all about, considering that's exactly how you would determine how that phone was performing, how quickly it was responding to a set number of tasks, and that's how your score is determined. And where these phones perhaps failed after updates, because there's a lot about kernel density as well. If you're talking about single cores, dual cores, if we could get into the technicalities, that would be interesting.
Sure. So Geekbench, we've designed to be a great measure of mobile phone performance. It uses operations that most people would use on their phones on a day-to-day basis, things like processing web pages, running JavaScript engines, that sort of thing. Those are the tasks that we're trying to emulate. And what the Geekbench score does is it sort of provides a subjective measure of performance. One of the points you brought up earlier was that whenever a new iPhone their phone feels slow, Geekbench is a way to quantify whether that feeling is correct or not. And in this case, it absolutely is.
It's interesting, whilst we are actually having this chat, I think we lost your audio very quickly over there, but since we are live right now, it's interesting because we've got a lot of comments coming in. Ram Gupta says, this is true, I'm facing this in my 6 Plus. Hari Jagdish says, of course this sounds very geeky, but should he update or not? I think, it's interesting to discuss that, John, because people will be wary of these updates now. So if I own, and it's interesting because while you say the 6, the 6S and the 7 are affected by this, the previous versions, the 5S perhaps, is not affected by this. So where do iPhone users stand based on your research?
So right now, it looks like, as you said, the 6, the 6S, and the 7 are affected. The 5S was not affected. It's not clear to us whether or not the 5S has the same problem or not. It could be that the processor is a lower power processor with reduced performance because it is an older chip. Its demands are less on the battery. My expectation, though, is that at least for the 8 and possibly even for the 10, this will be an issue in the next year or two. I don't see anything in the design of the 8 that would suggest that this won't be a problem continuing forward. The 10 being a new phone with a different battery capacity and different battery style may be immune, may not be. We don't know at this time. The thing that I would encourage users to do, though, is to not continue to install the updates. While these updates may cause reduced performance, there is a lot of valuable features in these new updates, in particular when it comes to security. Apple's continually improving the security and the stability of the device. So I would encourage users to continue to install these updates. And if they do have these slowdowns and this is a source of concern, then a battery replacement right now is the way to fix that.
And that is the key point, because the moral of the story with all of your research and the posts that went viral on Reddit also seem to be in the tech community that the quick fix for something like this is to replace your battery. And it's not really to get rid of your iPhone and upgrade to the next one, because if you get a new battery, your scores go up automatically.
Right. And that's the thing that's one of the things that personally I'm disappointed with Apple's approach with this fix, is that it's kind of a lot of non-technical users will look at a slow phone and decide it's time to upgrade their phone rather than upgrade their battery. I think if Apple had been a lot more direct with their messaging, saying this is what they're doing, this is sort of the problem, here's our solution. If you're not happy with that solution, here's another solution. I think if they'd been much more upfront about that, there'd be a lot less confusion from their users and their customers, and I think there'd be a lot less sort of fuel for the planned obsolescence fire, if you will.
Absolutely, John. It seems to be that transparency should have been key in something like this. But I want to understand something from you as well, since we've managed to grab you at this time. Is that, when we talk about this iPhone versus Android battle that plays out all over the world, could something like this be happening with flagship Android phones as well? Take a OnePlus 5 or a 5T or a Samsung Galaxy or even a Google Pixel 2. Would they be facing similar issues as well?
It is possible that they could be facing similar issues. We've done some preliminary analysis of our database, because this is, of course, on top of other people's minds. If they don't have an iPhone, they have an Android phone. Do they have to worry about this as well? And what we found from our research, which we're hoping to publish something a little more formal, but from our preliminary results, Android phones are not affected by this issue.
Right, John. Really appreciate you joining us. And this is an important one for everyone to see. If your phone is slowing down and you kept imagining it, then your iPhone perhaps is an old one, and you can pinch yourself, because it isn't something you're imagining. Your phone was actually slowing down because of the reasons in this video. Thanks so much for tuning in to Bloomberg Quint.